Welcome back to the 21st. I'm Nyla Boodoo. On Mondays at this time, we talk Illinois politics, and what a week we've got ahead of us in the State House. We're facing a pretty big deadline. That's May 31st. That's next Tuesday for the budget situation. My guest today, Chris Kjærgaard, is a political reporter with the Peoria Journal-Star. He's joining us from Peoria. Hey, Chris.
Hi there.
And Brian Mackey is on the line with us from WUIS in Springfield, where he covers state government and politics. Brian, welcome back to the 21st.
Hey, Nyla.
Now, let's start with this weekend, because part of what we like to do is catch folks up on what happened over the weekend. And I think we saw a lot of Governor Rauner this weekend, so I thought we could play a little bit of it because we heard him talk about things on Saturday, and then we heard a different conversation from him on Sunday. Saturday was the GOP state convention in Peoria. Let's hear Governor's words at the GOP convention.
We're going to bring in the resources and put together the biggest ground game that's ever been done for legislative races in Illinois history. And we are going to pick up seats against the corrupt Chicago machine and Madigan's Democrats. We are going to pick up seats.
So that was Saturday, promising to defeat Democrats this fall. Then yesterday, the governor had a message. He was ready to work with said Democrats on the almost 11-month-long budget impasse.
We'll continue to negotiate. We'll work in good faith for as long as it takes.
So talking about compromise as well. Let's break down first and start with, Chris, let's start with that GOP convention. What was the atmosphere like for this GOP state convention in Peoria this weekend?
Well, it was a very red meat kind of convention with all the fist-pumping, foot-stomping kind of speeches that you tend to expect from those types of affairs between the governor, the comptroller, much of the statewide Republican delegation in Congress, though interestingly not Senator Kirk, but all of them got up and gave very impassioned speeches, either about need for change at the federal level or, in most cases, need for change at the state level. There were a number of videos to jazz up the audience that were very anti-Madigan, anti-Springfield, so the mood was very much a fire up the troops.
Fire up the troops, and one of the biggest things that got people fired up, Chris, was the idea emphasizing the definition of marriage as between one man and one woman as a key part of the GOP platform. How much of that was a conversation this weekend?
That dominated the conversation throughout the weekend, from the discussions at the platform committee throughout the day on Friday about that, and obviously those who were opposed to the proposal that came out of the platform committee for a change in that language in the party platform that would have acknowledged different types of marriage besides one man, one woman, which also would have emphasized religious freedom planks to the platform, met some serious opposition. In fact, folks who were opposed to that change, who wanted to retain the one man, one woman language, absolutely leapt into action. There were buttons they were handing out.
And people were even booing people who were saying, look, we need to appeal to younger voters, and this is not for younger voters. This is something that the notion of marriage as one man and one woman is going to leave us out of a lot of conversations.
Right. I was a little surprised at the vitriol there coming from opponents of that change, who very aggressively interrupted the two speakers who were in favor of it, and you did not see that happening in the other direction.
And I know that the primary Donald Trump supporter who spoke at this GOP convention wasn't actually even from Illinois. So I'm curious about news with delegates like Todd Ricketts, as in the Cubs family Ricketts, for folks who are not familiar. We saw news this weekend. He's spending a lot of money on anti-Trump ads. What was the feeling from delegates there? Because they're bound to vote for Trump, at least in the first round of balloting when we get to the national GOP convention this summer.
They are, and it was interesting because and a number of speakers referenced the fact that we've come out of a very divisive primary on the Republican side, and they were very, very clearly trying to emphasize unity, and you could see people making the turn in some of their rhetoric, some more slowly than others, with certainly the governor and several of those who are either statewide or are in Congress not mentioning Trump by name, but rather pledging to support the ticket. Others, though, were very, very much trying to remind people that that Trump will be the nominee and will require the support from rank and file party members. So if folks are trying to bring together their party and trying to instill some unity there.
That's Chris Kiergaard with Peoria Journal-Star, joining us as well from WUIS in Springfield, Brian Mackey. Brian, I wonder if you can remind us, Governor Rauner's, what he said about Donald Trump. And it sort of seems like everyone's kind of walking, we've got Illinois Republicans walking a very careful tightrope here when it comes to Donald Trump as the Republican nominee.
You know, it's funny because what the governor has said about Donald Trump is very similar to what he has said about same-sex marriage, which is as little as possible. He was asked about Trump earlier this year and some of the specific comments that Trump had made. This was around the time that Trump was slow to disavow a Klansman's endorsement, and the governor was very critical of that. However, he also said he'll support the ticket, and every time it's come up since then, he tries to change the conversation. Likewise with same-sex marriage. It's just not something he wants to talk about because, it distracts from what I think he views as his core issues. On the other hand, I don't think voters are going to have a hard time remembering that Donald Trump is seems to be heading for the top of the Republican ticket. We've already had Democratic campaigns out there. Congresswoman Duckworth, for example, who's running against Senator Mark Kirk. Some people who back her are constantly putting out press releases that say the Kirk-Trump agenda or the Trump-Kirk agenda. So Republicans will be tied to Trump if the Democrats have their way.
Brian, how did Governor Rauner handle all of the conversations about same-sex marriage? As Chris was saying, as he was a little surprised at some of the vitriol that was directed towards the notion of same-sex marriage and that marriage should be between one man and one woman. Governor Rauner's always been pretty quiet on this. So how did he handle it this weekend?
Yeah, and again, I should say I was not there myself, but from what I've seen in the coverage, he avoided it, as he always has. And this is something that one of the most pointed examples of this actually happened a couple of years ago. He was still running. There was an editorial board meeting at the Chicago Tribune, and they broadcast this live on the web. And you could see the board members really just asking him, what do you think about same-sex marriage? And at this point, I believe it was already the law in Illinois. And he said, I think the voters should decide. And they said, well, what do you believe in your heart? What do you think? He said, doesn't matter. I think the voters should decide. And he just steadfastly refused to take a stand on it. And I think it's a good example of his approach to political communication, which is if something is not in his interest, he can be very disciplined about just really working very hard to avoid the topic, not take a stand, not alienate, as you pointed out, what is still a very key and significant constituency in the Republican Party that feels very strongly about this topic.
Let's talk about what Governor Rauner has taken a very clear stand on, which is we heard him say again. So we heard sort of his, firing up the troops on Saturday. Hey, we're going to take Speaker Madigan down. And then we heard him say yesterday, look, I'm ready to compromise. Republican leadership, Republican members are ready to compromise on this budget situation. We're almost 11 months now into the budget impasse. But he also said, I'm ready, but listen, I'm not going to sign, and this is what we've heard him say consistently, an unbalanced budget into law. So where are we with this, Brian? I mean, can you set up what we've got ahead of us this week? And we've got 9 days here, right?
Yeah, and I mean, we've gone hundreds and hundreds of days without a budget in Illinois, and really this deadline this week is somewhat of an artificial marker. I mean, Illinois is now going on a year without a balanced, without any sort of official state budget. There's been these piecemeal pieces of legislation. The schools, K through 12 schools got their funding. There was a little bit of a patch for higher education that came through. Now, lawmakers have also passed a sort of patch to give a little bit of something to the social service agencies that they contract with to take care of some of our most vulnerable people in this state. But in terms of an overall budget, the governor is still saying it has to be tied to his pro-business, anti-union or union weakening agenda.
Can I ask you about the social services, Brian? Because
sure.
That bill, he has 60 days from May 18th to sign that bill to fund social services. Is he waiting first to see if there's a budget deal, or do we know what's happening with those social service funding, that stopgap funding?
Well, far be it from me to know what is in the governor's mind, but it does seem that, there have been some indications that he has concerns about this. Certainly his press shop has put out, called various portions of this legislation into question. They said there were drafting errors. Democrats will come back and say, "Oh no, we left. Those aren't errors. We put that in the language of the bill to make sure that the money is not misspent on something other than social service." I won't get into the details of that, but the governor has indicated some reluctance about this, and really. This goes back years. The governor has talked about social service spending, human service spending, as a point of leverage over the Democrats. He has said that he viewed it as a wedge issue where he hoped he could get Democrats to kind of choose. Do you want to support government employee unions and the labor movement in general, or do you want to fund social services? And Democrats so far have refused to sort of be boxed into making that choice. And here we are, how many months later, without an official state budget.
Chris, I wonder where Peoria lawmakers stand in all of this, where you're sort of seeing the sense of what conversations are happening in Peoria around the budget impasse.
Well, for the most part, area lawmakers have stuck with their delegations, and we're interesting in that we have members in House Republicans, House Democrats, Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats out of Peoria. They have all pretty carefully hewed to their particular partisan affiliation, with some limited exceptions to that, because we have some state facilities here that have caused some concerns over closures, and we do have one Democratic lawmaker who's been very outspoken about the need to begin to talk about reforms to the workers' compensation system, and has really kind of been pushing that as what she hopes will be a solution. But as far as concrete action or concrete proposals, there really have not been many. Everybody here seems to be following the leader, more or less.
Well, and as you say that, everyone following the leader, I wonder how significant, Brian, you found the language. Governor Rauner said, look, I think rank and file Democrats also want to move towards compromise. And I think that's an allusion to the different working groups that have been happening. Brian, what's been going on with all of these different working groups we've seen where we hear this term rank and file, i.e. not the leadership of people who are trying to resolve this budget situation?
Well, I personally think we need to be cautious with that, because that is part of the governor's message. He wants to portray this as big bad Speaker Michael Madigan, the Democratic Speaker of the House, as, and one of the governor's favorite lines is Speaker Madigan and the politicians he controls, right? So he wants to make it seem as though there's this divide, and that if only Mike Madigan didn't have his thumb on the Democratic politicians, they would do the right thing and pass his agenda. I think that Democrats have some real deep philosophical differences with the governor over issues like workers' compensation, over how free and open or restrictive our court system should be in terms of injury lawsuits and that sort of thing. And labor and trial lawyers, those are core members of the Democratic Party. They're not, Democrats don't view them as special interests the way the governor does. They view
Right.
them as their brethren.
Right.
And so I think that you have a situation where, the governor wants to make it seem as though it's Speaker Madigan pulling the strings, but I think a lot of Democrats have questions about these things. And even if they would agree on changes to workers' compensation and the tort law system, which I think is possible, I don't think they like the idea of doing it sort of at gunpoint. I mean, maybe that's probably overstating it, but, the governor has, as we said, the governor has talked about using this funding as a point, and he won't negotiate on the budget until Democrats come along on these items. And I think that they don't want to say, because then if they go along this year, what's to say he won't come back and say, ask for right to work statewide in a future budget? I think that they're looking down the line and saying, we don't want to set that precedent.
We just have less than a minute left, so I'll ask both of you very briefly, yes or no, do you think do you think we're going to see movement before Memorial Day, Brian?
Oh, you're asking me to be a pundit. I have no idea, but somebody who has been following Illinois government a lot longer than I have says always bet on nothing. So I'll just defer to that person's wisdom.
Chris, I know you've gotten some notoriety for your budget beard. I know that you haven't. So basically, are you telling us that you haven't shaved since in 328 days is how long your beard is at this point?
I stopped shaving May 31st when the legislature adjourned without a budget, and I'm afraid I'm going to remain unshaven into June. I don't see any major compromise coming in the next 8 days. A compromise which, while it may come from the rank and file, still has to be blessed by the governor and the legislative leaders, which brings the personalities back into it again.
That's Chris Kiergaard. He's a political reporter with the Peoria Journal-Star. We tweeted out a picture of Chris's beard. Thanks to Chris and Brian Mackey. That does it for us today. I know we're going to be following all the action in Springfield all this week, so stay tuned. Thanks for listening. I'm Nyla Boodoo.